It's sloppy, it's unpredictable, it's heavily emotional, and all of these things are difficult for technology. Technology doesn't like to move around and shake and be flexed and be stretched. It wants to know exactly what kind of environmental conditions it'll be exposed to, and it doesn't like to consider whether or not you feel stupid wearing it. That's usually a minor consideration, but as you know, as clothing designers, it can be absolutely paramount. Like that completely dictates whether or not somebody will adopt something, like a new piece of clothing or a new piece of technology. So I want to expand our horizons just a little bit. We've talked about the existing functions of clothing and how those can be augmented, but the other side of technology is that it can introduce new functions that clothing isn't sort of supposed to do or hasn't done in the past. So this is an example of that. This is a jacket that a few of my students designed for an architect. You saw the back of it before. It has that light up web on the back. So this is designed for an architect who likes to work and he wants to look very trendy, but he's also into sort of eco fashion and he needs to be safe while on the bike, but he doesn't want to wear one of those yellow vests or anything like that. So it provides him with visibility and it also provides him with power. So these are solar panels in the front, and as he bikes, they're facing the sun, and maybe on his way to work, it charges his phone in the pocket, and it also charges the power source for the light in the back. So then when he bikes home from work, the sun from this morning is powering this evening's safety. Those aren't things that clothes have really done before, gather power or charge devices or anything like that. Similarly, one of the areas I work heavily in is body sensing and picking up signals and information about the body. And this is, again, something that clothing hasn't really done before. Your clothes haven't been able to tell you you might have a heart attack, or in this case, you should sit up straight or you're going to have back problems later in life. This is a shirt with this line down his spine is a bend sensor, and it keeps track of seated posture, and then if he sits badly for too long, a little message pops up on his screen to remind him to sit up. Poor posture is the cause of like 2/3 of workplace injury in the U.S., so it's a big deal. And as you get older, you will feel more passionately about the effects of bad posture. But it's the kind of thing that you don't think about until it's kind of too late. So it's really important to have preventative measures, and this is one of those. And I can talk about that in more detail. But the point of it here is that it is doing that sensing function. It's detecting something about you and reminding you about something, which is not something that clothes have done. This is another example. This is another student project where he was trying to develop a glove for motorcyclists and scooter riders and maybe even cyclists. So this glove uses sensors, again it's sensing the body, uses sensors to know when your hand is around the handlebars or when it's not. And then it checks a number of sensors to figure out what position your hand's in, and then displays the appropriate arrow, for which turn you're planning on doing. I should let you know, because it's hilarious, that incidentally, he also designed it so that if you extend one particular finger, it flashes a really angry message at whoever it is that you're trying to emotionally communicate with. So also meeting our emotional communicative needs as well as our functional protective needs. And this is another project by the same student that we've only just recently done. And this is a project looking broadly at increasing sensory perception, so things that you can't really detect right now or you can't detect in certain situations, and trying to make them a little bit more perceptible. And specifically, we're looking at firefighters. So this glove is designed for firefighters doing what they call primary search, so going through a building and trying to figure out where victims might be, or what the status of the interior is before they start dousing it with water. The building might be very smoky, very dark, might be very difficult to find your way around. And right now what they have to do is kind of poke at things with sticks, or the handle of their axe or something like, or a tool like that, and crawl around and touch things with their hands, which can be dangerous in a lot of ways. So we wanted to build something that would allow them to feel their way around the room without actually feeling anything, without actually touching anything. So the black spot on the back there is an ultrasonic range sensor. It works kind of like sonar, so you can kind of scan the room like this, and then it vibrates the glove more strongly if an obstacle is nearer. So you can sort of feel, by changes in intensity, what the outline of the room might look like, or where the door might be, or if there's something under this bed, or something like that. And again, that kind of perception is not something that clothing has done, but if you think back to those factors I mentioned being important, that physical proximity, now we're able to communicate through a sense that we don't use very often in technology communications, which is the tactile sense. And by having access to the whole body, we can communicate tactily through the whole skin, not just necessarily that one point, which is similar to what this does. And if you think about that a little further, this has one tactile ability. It can tell you there's something going on, something, look at me. But it can't actually say like, hey, your mom's on the phone, but it's not really urgent, so you can ignore it for right now, and she'll get back to you later. Like, that's too much information. And the reason that it's so narrow in this bandwidth is because there's just this one point. This thing can, all it has the ability to do is like maybe vibrate more strongly or less strongly, or maybe do temporal patterns, which are difficult to comprehend and take a lot of attention, but it can't do patterns. And there are a lot of interesting examples of tactile display out there, and the potential for tactile display in things like navigation as well as communication of information. So if you had an array of, tactile stimulators somewhere, you could maybe understand who was calling, or understand the urgency of that message, or even, I don't know, communicate in Braille or something to people. But it's not something we've ever done before because we've never had that much surface area to deal with. Okay, I will go through these really quickly. One last new function. This is a project that a student group of mine did with Johnson Space Center, and they were interested in, right now they're interested in new interfaces on astronauts as they're floating around the International Space Station or whatever. And they're interested in being able to interact with technology without going over to the thing and using it over there. So they wanted an alarm system that a crew member could wear that would allow them to sense an alarm in multiple modalities, because you don't know if the crew member is asleep, awake, maybe they're running, maybe they're sitting still, maybe they have headphones in, or maybe they don't. You don't know where they're looking. So you can't really rely on any one sense. So this alarm system uses the tactile modality, the auditory modality, and a visual modality to provide different levels of alarm to the crew member. Everything from, hey, your buddy wants to talk to you, to the space station is burning down, get out. Actually, that probably doesn't happen, but the high level. Okay, so one other thing I want to point out is that this is really not a new thing. I mentioned that Google Glass has been around since at least 1993, but so has everything else. This is an example from an exhibition in 1968 over here. And what's here is, it's like a knitted jumper with conductive yarns knitted right into the fabric to provide heat. So similar to the heat pad I showed you before, use conductive yarns to generate heat like an electric blanket. So 1968, okay? Heated jackets are still in the news as being really high-tech futuristic stuff. This one is from Polartec and Malden Mills, but there are a number of other ones too. The North Face has one, the Net5. There's a few other companies on the market that are also doing this stuff. And periodically, usually at the beginning of the winter, it comes around as like, in the tech magazines as something really innovative. Similarly, this is a hoodie by Leah Buckley at MIT Media Lab that got a lot of press maybe 4 years ago or so when she made it. And it's a turn signal, so it allows a cyclist to do a turn signal, similar to the glove that I showed you. But this over here is from the same 1968 exhibition, and this is a motorcycle jacket that also has brake lights and turn signals using incandescent bulbs, which is kind of amazing to me. But again, in the 60s, the same concepts, the same ideas, and they're treated equally as futuristically. They're still exciting futuristic concepts of the way that clothing could be. Okay, so if we've been doing this for so long, why don't we all have it at home, and why don't we all love it already? This is kind of the crux of a lot of my research. What is it that is standing between everyday, average people and these ideas that I think are quite compelling in a lot of different ways? Okay, so one area is the hidden challenges of wearable technology. This is a picture of a a motion capture suit. It uses sensors very, very similar to what's in your cell phone, strapped all over the body to detect movements and positions of the body. I made this, you can laugh. This is fine, it works really well, it picks up your movement really precisely, but you have to wear that thing. And you even might have to wear that thing on your head. And people don't like wearing stuff like that. They don't like it because it's uncomfortable, and more importantly, they don't like it because it looks weird. And this isn't what clothing looks like. And we are very, very sensitive to appropriateness in clothing. The reason it is like that, though, is because this is what you need to do in order to get that kind of good data. This is what the sensor wants, not what the human wants. If you put a sensor into the clothes that you and I are wearing today, you get a lot of mess out of it. And that is a problem. I'll illustrate that for you. Electrodes or electrodermal sensors are probably the worst case scenario for this, so I'm going to use that as an example. Over here on the left is a picture of what they call a Holter, or a Holter-style heart monitor. If any of you have ever had a heart problem, you might have gotten sent home from the doctors with something like this to wear, usually for a day or maybe a week. And it just records the activity of your heart so that we can look at it later. And that's how it looks. Over on the right is a bra that I tried to make a lot of years ago to replace that, on the principle that these little white patches are just conductive things held against the skin. So how hard is that really? I mean, it's just, you know, like a coin. You can put a coin against your skin. That's the same thing, right? So that's what I tried to do, naively. And the bra has a few conductive patches that replicate the same kind of principle as this does. Okay, so this is what you get out of, you know, the white sticky things on his chest, okay? And this is what you get out of the bra that I made. This, you probably don't know a lot about signal processing, but this is not a problem. This looks fine. We can clean that up and make it look like that, and that's reasonable, okay? But this is what happens when that person runs with the white sticky patches on. You can see the nice clean signal, and then it goes crazy. And this is what happens when you do that with the bra. So what you end up with is nothing. It's just garbage. Absolutely nothing useful. And all because somebody was running. You even see this if they like do such outrageous things as like lift their arms up. So basically, I hit a brick wall and discovered some problems. And a lot of those problems are because the electrode, that conductive thing, is moving around on the skin. And all these really sensitive electrical signals it's picking up are just getting garbled as it moves around. So that's extremely bad in conductive electrode, but it's also bad in something like what's in your phone. Particularly, so if you're trying to figure out the position of your arm from a sensor like this strapped to it, you have to do that by taking the acceleration that the sensor experiences and going backwards from acceleration to velocity and from velocity to position. And if you get one little error in the acceleration, then the position, like it might tell me that my arm is like, you know, outside the building. Just by that one little error that gets magnified as we go backwards. So there's a lot of challenges in actually getting the true, actual information. And a lot of them, as I mentioned before, are coming exactly from those things that make us comfortable in clothing. So, harder than it looks. I won't spend much time on this. One of the things we're trying to do is measure the way that clothing moves so that we know how much problem the sensor is going to experience as it moves around in everyday clothing. Yeah. Okay, so another challenge is manufacture. How do you put this stuff together? These things are meant to be made on an assembly line that looks a lot different than the assembly line that puts together your t-shirt. It has far fewer humans in it, and it has a lot more, like, you know, heat machines and things like that, a lot more robots. And it produces something that is designed to survive the environment of like being brought in and out of your pocket and held in your hand. It's not designed to sit next to your body and move around and maybe even be thrown in the dryer, of all things. And a lot of this comes down to the level slightly below smart clothing, which is e-textiles, or the integration of those electronic bits into the textile structure. So some of the challenges you have. I mentioned before that a lot of smart fabrics just have a conductor integrated into them so that you can communicate electronic signals across a fabric area. So something as simple as putting a sleeve in can totally disrupt that process. So if you have a conductor that's woven into, you know, these three pieces of the garment, the back and the front and the sleeve, it's got to cross that seam. And those of you who have put together a garment with a sleeve know that once that sleeve's in there, you can't really, even if we're stitching this on the surface, I can't really get from down here on the back all the way up and then down the sleeve with one stitch process because I can't get in there anymore. So we have all these challenges of planning and also of electrical durability, making sure that those connections that pass seams are actually stable and line up. If this is woven into the garment, I've got to make sure that my manufacture process brings those things exactly together so that they meet perfectly across that seam. And I have to figure out a way to make the electrical connection stable, because electrical connections are much more sensitive than the mechanical connection of just sewing two pieces of fabric together.